Learning objectives. After reading this chapter, you should be able to. Learning objective number 1. Describe the way a firm competes within its industry. A firm's business strategy is defined by the manner in which it answers 3 primary questions. 1. Who do we serve? 2. What products and services do we provide? And 3. How do we provide those products and services? Different firms answer these primary questions in fundamentally different ways, and it is these responses that lay the foundation for the competitive landscape of an industry. Learning objective number 2. Outline how various forces in the external environment impact the attractiveness of an industry. In defining a firm's business strategy, a manager must conduct a thorough assessment of the external environment. This assessment will generally reveal the attractiveness of an industry. Certain industries are inherently more attractive than others. The S-forces model, which includes an assessment of entry barriers, buyer power, supplier power, competitive rivalry, and available substitutes, is one way to assess the relative attractiveness of an industry. However, strategy development based on an evaluation of the external environment is incomplete. Learning objective number 3. Describe how a firm's internal environment impacts its strategic approach. A manager must also evaluate a firm's internal resources to determine how its capabilities and access to resources can provide a competitive advantage. Internal resources that can provide these advantages include tangible items such as real estate, inventory, and equipment, as well as intangible assets such as production processes, brand name, and culture. A firm's employees can also be a strong internal resource that can create a core competency within an industry. Learning objective number 4. Describe a firm's value chain. Having outlined a firm's strategy and analyzed its internal resources and the external environment, a manager can use the value chain tool to break the firm into various activities to discover where it is adding value. The manager can then explore the connections between the firm and the other value chains in its value system to better create fit among its primary and support activities. In so doing, the manager will have a better sense of the firm's competitive advantage and how to sustain it. Learning objective number 5. Perform a SWOT analysis of a firm by describing its internal strengths and weaknesses and defining the opportunities and threats that it faces in the marketplace. A SWOT analysis, which outlines a firm's internal strengths and weaknesses as well as the opportunities and threats in the marketplace, can be an effective way to gauge a firm's current and future position within an industry. This analysis is also useful in determining a firm's competitive advantage. Learning objective number 6. Describe how a firm can generate competitive advantage through one of the 3 generic strategies: cost leadership, differentiation, or focus. Competitive advantage is derived from a firm's ability to create value for its customers. The way in which a firm creates this value is often through cost or differentiation. From these positions emerge 3 generic business level strategies: cost leadership, differentiation, and focus. Firms that compete based on cost leadership provide a product or service at the lowest possible cost. Firms that compete on differentiation provide a product or service that is unique and that competitors cannot easily replicate. Finally, firms that compete with a focus strategy apply either cost leadership or differentiation to a specific target market, geography, or some other defined entity. Chapter outline. Introduction. How the external environment impacts industry attractiveness. Quarters 5. Forces model. Threat of new entrants. Bargaining power of suppliers. Threat of substitutes. Bargaining power of customers. Rivalry among existing competitors. Limits of the 5 forces model. How a firm's internal environment impacts strategy. Resource based view of the firm. Company resources. The firm as a value chain. Primary and support activities. Value systems. SWOT analysis. Competitive advantage. Cost leadership. Differentiation. Focus. Back in the middle. Employees in generic strategies. Key terms. Focus. A strategy in which a company focuses its sales efforts on a specific geographical region, a specific group of purchasers, or a specific product type. Differentiation. A strategy in which a firm seeks to be unique in its industry along a dimension or a group of dimensions that are valued by consumers. Economies of scale. Cost savings achieved when the volume of a product produced by a firm enables it to reduce per unit costs. Value. The amount consumers are willing to pay for a product or service. It comes from offering a lower price than that of competitors or profit on a unique product whose benefits outweigh a higher potential cost. Cost leadership. A strategy that aims to provide a product or service at as low a price as possible to a broad audience. SWOT analysis. A tool that allows managers to take a snapshot of their firm's internal strengths and weaknesses as well as the opportunities and threats that are evident in the external environment. Strategic flexibility. The capability to identify and react to changes in the external environment and to mobilize internal resources to deal with those changes. Primary activities. The activities involved in the physical creation of the product and its sale and transfer to the buyer. Support activities. Activities that provide the support necessary for the primary activities to occur. Value chain analysis. A systematic way of examining all of the activities a firm performs and determining how they interact to form a source of competitive advantage. Resource-based view of the firm. A theory that a firm can develop a competitive advantage through the collection and harvesting of resources. Bargaining power. The pressure that a supplier or buyer can exert on a company. First mover advantage. A competitive advantage that occurs when a firm is first to offer desirable products or services that secure customer loyalty. Barriers to entry. Obstacles a firm may face while trying to enter a market or an industry. Self-reflection. Framing for competitive advantage. The ability to frame a situation is an essential managerial skill. Framing entails observing, interpreting, and acting to make sense of a situation. When managers create a frame of reference for a firm's business level strategy, they are focusing on the key actions that will result in a competitive advantage. On a scale of 1 to 5, evaluate your strategic framing skills as you read the following statements. 1 equals never, 2 equals rarely, 3 equals sometimes, 4 equals usually, 5 equals always. I can map out how a firm creates value for its customers. When evaluating a product, I consider its quality. When studying a company, I try to identify ways that expenses can be reduced. I know how a firm positions itself to differentiate its products and services. I realize that some firms are at a competitive disadvantage because they lack a clear strategy. I understand how an industry structure influences a firm's strategy. I understand the rationale for why some firms target a smaller segment of an industry. I recognize that a firm's tangible and intangible resources are an important determinant of competitive advantage. When studying a firm's strategy, I am aware of the primary and support activities needed for implementation. When thinking about a firm's strategy, I consider how the contributions of employees create value. Based on this assessment, what are your strategic framing strengths? What can you improve? Introduction. This chapter focuses on how a firm competes in its industry and builds competitive advantage through a clearly articulated strategy. As a manager, it is helpful to think of 2 questions regarding the choice of competitive strategy. The first question a manager must ask is, how attractive is the industry? Industries have unique structures and characteristics that shape the manner and level of competition among firms and the potential for profit. Some industries are characterized by high growth and constant change, while others are relatively stable. In the airline industry, for instance, profits have traditionally been low for various reasons: high fuel costs, legacy cost structures, and intense competition. Poor structural industry conditions, however, do not preclude smart players from earning outsized profits. As we saw in Chapter 4, Southwest Airlines is the perfect example of a company that succeeds despite difficult industry conditions. Having evaluated the characteristics of the industry, a manager must then ask a second question: how will the firm compete in the industry? This positioning of a firm within its industry is the essence of business level strategy. In setting business level strategy, a manager evaluates the attractiveness of the industry structure, the opportunities and threats in the external environment, and the firm's internal resources to determine how to compete. In developing a business level strategy, a manager must answer 3 fundamental questions. 1. Who do we serve? A broad or narrow market segment. 2. What do we provide? A small or large range of products or services. And 3. How do we provide it? A unique production approach or delivery processes. Those 3 questions are illustrated in Figure 5.1. The answers to these questions often determine which generic strategic approach a firm will follow: a low-cost strategy, a differentiation strategy, a focus strategy, or some combination thereof. To outline the concepts of business level strategy, we'll discuss 2 firms that have experienced different levels of success. One firm has been able to sustain strong growth in an extremely competitive marketplace, while the other has struggled to develop a consistent growth strategy. Figure 5.1. The 3 components of strategy: what products and services, who customers, how, process approach. Starbucks versus Krispy Kreme. Many professionals, parents, parents and students begin their mornings with a cup of coffee, and increasingly, that cup is from Starbucks. The company's products can be found almost anywhere on street corners, in bookstores, in office buildings, in shopping malls, and in cafeterias. Starbucks has become so popular in America today that it is not unusual for busy urban streets to have 2 or 3 Starbucks outlets within sight of each other. However, while the well-known coffee maker is ubiquitous today, the specialty coffee market barely existed just 2 decades ago. Howard Schultz, the individual most responsible for the growth of Starbucks, began his career as a salesperson for a housewares company. He was first introduced to specialty coffee when he visited an account named Starbucks in Seattle that was buying many of his company's plastic cone filters. Upon seeing and tasting the local company's products, Schultz became convinced that this type of coffee could be sold nationwide in standalone restaurant facilities. Following his trip, Schultz left his job in New York and signed on with the fledgling company. Unable to convince senior management to open additional retail outlets, Schultz eventually left Starbucks. After leaving Starbucks, Schultz and his colleagues opened several specialty coffee houses in the Seattle area. When the original owners of Starbucks looked to exit their business, Schultz gathered capital to buy it. Following the acquisition in 1987, Schultz planned to open 125 stores in 5 years using the Starbucks name. Despite the fact that the market for specialty coffee was still fragmented and most consumers had little concept of the product or its benefits, Schultz believed that premium coffee engulfed in a certain retail ambience had broad appeal. To the retail ambience that he sought to recreate was a European coffee house where patrons linger for hours. He hoped to build a brand and a customer experience which linked Starbucks with fine coffee. Starbucks quickly gained a cult following in major metropolitan areas and later spread across the country. Through a unique strategy and well-defined activities, Schultz brought value to both consumers and shareholders. The results of his strategy were nothing less than breathtaking. By 2014, the company boasted $16.4 billion in annual revenues with over 21,000 outlets in the United States and abroad. As you can see from the example of Howard Schultz at Starbucks, performance and strategy make a difference in terms of profitability. Prior to the late 1980s, the coffee industry appeared to be a low-growth, low-profit segment of the global beverage industry. Market leaders such as Folgers and Maxwell House competed based on price and concentrated on selling coffee for consumption in a home. Schultz's strategy was predicated on creating an environment where individuals would pay a premium to enjoy coffee outside their home. Though other coffee shops are direct competitors of Starbucks, the company also competes against Folgers and Maxwell House for overall coffee consumption. Schultz developed a competitive advantage relative to large coffee producers and other coffee shops by differentiating his product and constructing a system of internal and external firm activities that shielded the company from many threats. In hindsight, Schultz gambled on the assumption that consumers would pay premium prices for this added quality and experience. He mitigated these risks through a defensible strategy and the development of core competencies, human resources, for instance, that further differentiated his offering relative to competitors. However, the experience has been very different for many other food and beverage companies that have attempted to expand rapidly into structurally challenging segments of the market. The story of Krispy Kreme donuts is marked by extreme highs and lows. Despite launching the most successful initial public offering APO of the year in 2000, the company became the subject of a Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) investigation just 3 years later. While the SEC investigation centered on accounting irregularities, many of the company's core problems stemmed from overexpansion and lack of attention to changing eating habits. Krispy Kreme was started by Vernon Rudolph in 1937 when he purchased a recipe for donuts from a French chef in New Orleans. As the donut chain gained recognition in its home market, the company began to expand to other regions of the country. During this period, Krispy Kreme pursued expansion through company-owned outlets and franchised operations. In 2000, when Krispy Kreme went public, the company's stock was pushed to new highs as investors watched consumers line up for hours at a new outlet to get hot glazed Krispy Kreme donuts as flush with EPO funds and a mandate from investors. The company began an aggressive push across the United States and Canada. In 5 years, the company expanded from fewer than 200 stores to 433, mainly through its franchising model, Ch.5part1. At the same time Krispy Kreme began ramping up its expansion strategy, many Americans began new dieting fads such as the Atkins and South Beach diets. Both promoted a lower intake of carbohydrates, that is, breads and cereals. Despite such widespread media attention focused on new weight loss strategies, Krispy Kreme failed to recognize the potential negative effect that such a shift in consumer preferences might have on demand for its products. The company also failed to expand into new products that might insulate it from a drop in demand for donuts. As the company continued to open new stores in 2004, profitability began to free fall, declining from $50 million in 2004 to a loss of $157 million in 2005. 6 as Krispy Kreme's sales began to slip in 2003. Senior managers started to engage in suspect accounting practices in an effort to maintain and sometimes boost profitability. When these accounting misdeeds came to light, the stock price fell from $44 in 2003 to $6 in 2005. 7 and the senior management team was replaced. If you look back at some of the press clippings or analyst reports from 2000 when it became a public company, you will see a very different view of Krispy Kreme. Many analysts initially hailed the company as a great brand with superior growth prospects, but the company lost sight of changes in the external marketplace and lost control of internal operating procedures. One key to a firm's long-term survival is its ability to understand and adapt to expected and unexpected changes in the marketplace. Krispy Kreme failed to adjust to changes in Americans' eating habits. In an effort to regain its former prominence, Krispy Kreme has closed poor-performing stores, cut operational costs, and streamlined less profitable businesses. These cost containment measures have enabled the company to begin to pursue an expansion plan. In doing so, the company has to be careful not to make the same mistakes again. To that end, it is being more careful about store formats and locations. With weaker domestic demand for its products, Krispy Kreme is heavily investing in international expansion. In contrast, the phenomenal growth of Starbucks is partially attributed to the company's ability to ride the wave of free spending and indulgence during the last 2 decades of the 20th century, when Americans were willing to pay over $3 for a cup of specialty coffee. In the aftermath of the global financial crisis of 2008, Starbucks had to reevaluate its business proposition, streamlining some of its offerings and slowing down its expansion plans. To achieve growth in the past, Starbucks relied on rapid expansion of stores, both domestically and internationally. Since then, they have shifted their strategy to operate in a leaner economy. For example, in 2011, Starbucks announced that it would pursue expansion into items like juices and teas that would be sold in grocery stores to enhance its product offerings in grocery stores as well as its own retail outlets. Starbucks acquired juice company Evolution Fresh and bakery La Boulange and formed an alliance with Danone for yogurt. These acquisitions and alliances have enabled the company to control more of its operations. Previously, the company sold Pepsi's naked juice in its Starbucks cafes. These have now been replaced with its own Evolution products. In early 2012, Starbucks unveiled a new service whereby customers could pay for purchases with their smartphones. Within a few short weeks, Starbucks became the largest and most popular retailer to offer this level of convenience. 1 degree by 2014, Starbucks was processing 5 million mobile payments per week. Through this effort, Starbucks sought to further differentiate its business in a marketplace that was increasingly competitive. Throughout this chapter, we'll discuss many examples of companies like Starbucks that have been able to achieve market success based on a superior strategy. Some companies have achieved this advantage through differentiation, while others have focused on cost efficiency. Still others have found success by narrowing their scope to focus on a small segment of the market. We will explore all 3 approaches in the chapter: how the external environment impacts industry attractiveness. As we saw in chapter 1, every firm is affected by its external environment. Most firms are affected by a common set of forces, including technological forces, economic forces, political and legal forces, sociocultural forces, and global forces. An effective strategy aligns a company's resources and strengths with the opportunities presented in the external environment. 12 In the examples of chapter 1, we saw how turbulence in a firm's external environment may create challenges. In the Walmart case, the firm faced extreme challenges as it attempted to expand its supercenter format format into California. The lesson from this example and the others in Chapter 1 was the importance of recognizing and developing strategies for a firm's various stakeholders. While the stakeholder tools help a manager recognize influential factors, they do not necessarily provide an understanding of a firm's industry environment. To comprehend Walmart's context, we would need to understand their relationship with their suppliers, customers, and also the nature of the competitive environment they are facing. One such tool to comprehend the industry context within which firms operate is the S-Forces model developed by Professor Michael Porter. Porter's 5 forces model. The model's original intent was to provide a comprehensive framework to assess an industry's long-run profit potential. It suggests that any industry's attractiveness can be assessed by exploring 5 basic forces. 13. The 5 forces model, as shown in Figure 5.4, includes the threat of new entrants, bargaining power of customers, threat of substitutes, bargaining power of suppliers, and rivalry among existing competitors. By examining these 5 factors, a manager can obtain a sense of the long-term prospects of the industry and the strategic forces that guide it. Any good strategist uses this tool as a starting point for identifying the strengths and weaknesses of an industry. This tool can also be used to assess which forces a firm might try to modify to make the industry more attractive for them. Force 1. The threat of new entrants. A common threat to any industry is the threat of entrants. While some industries have barriers that reduce this threat, others are easy to enter. When a new competitor enters an industry, it often means that more of the same products are supplied to the same customer base, which ultimately decreases profits for all players. While all industries have some threat of entry from competition except regulated or nationalized industries, the level of threat can differ from industry to industry. According to the S-Forces model, the threat of entry into an industry depends on the barriers to entry that are present and on the reaction from existing competitors that entrants can expect. 14. Barriers to entry tend to vary by industry, and they are the obstacles that a new entrant may face while trying to enter a market or an industry. Some of the most common entry barriers include high capital investments needed to enter the industry, and the high costs associated with customers switching from one company to another. There are other forms of entry barriers, which we'll explore in a moment. The personal computer PC industry provides an interesting example of entry barriers in action. The PC has become so ubiquitous today that it's easy to forget what the industry looked like just a few years ago. Prior to PCs, the computer market was dominated by firms such as IBM that produced large mainframe and mini computers for industrial and governmental use. Not only was it very costly to develop a new mainframe at the time, but convincing customers to switch was very hard as their costs of switching were very high. In the early 1980s, several startup firms began developing computers for use by individuals, including Apple, which achieved success among certain groups. When IBM launched its version of the PC, it quickly gained 42% of the market in only 2 years. 16. However, unlike its mainframe computers, IBM outsourced its PC processor to Intel and its operating system to Microsoft. In addition, IBM opened up its product architecture to encourage software developers to write programs for its PCs. 17. At the outset of the PC market, IBM maintained a huge competitive advantage over other firms because of its brand name, sales force, and relationship with lucrative corporate accounts. However, when IBM opened up its architecture to software and peripheral manufacturers, it also opened the door for competitors. In the past, IBM had kept system architectures in-house, developing proprietary systems for its mainframe computers. This made it hard for any new entrants to enter this market. But with the PC, IBM was late to the market and thus sought to make up time by outsourcing certain components and allowing those suppliers to sell those same components to any other company that might want to enter the PC market. Through this singular move, IBM tore down a huge entry barrier to the PC industry, allowing others to procure the same inputs from those suppliers. As demand for IBM PCs exploded, other firms started making IBM clones. 18. In fact, Compaq made over $100 million in revenue in its first year of offering IBM clones. 19 other clone manufacturers followed suit, including Dell, Gateway, and Hewlett-Packard. By 1986, IBM realized that it had set an open standard, but in doing so, it had spawned a set of imitators. By 1989, IBM's share of the PC market had fallen to 17% as customers began purchasing cheaper cloned PCs. See Figure 5.5. Over the past 20 years, there has been a tremendous shakeup in the personal computer industry. Compaq was purchased by HP in 2002, and in 2004, IBM sold its PC business to Lenovo, a Chinese multinational firm, for $1.25 billion. 10 years later, Lenovo became the top worldwide seller of personal computers. As you can see from IBM's foray into the PC industry, the lowering of barriers to entry encourages competition and, in turn, creates a less profitable industry for everyone. When these barriers are high, as was the case with IBM's mainframe BUC-NES, prospective competitors found it difficult to enter the industry, so the industry was more profitable for IBM and others who were already in it. Now that we've seen what can happen to an industry when entry barriers drop, let's discuss some of the major sources of barriers to entry, including supply-side economies of scale, demand-side benefits of scale, customer switching costs, capital requirements, incumbency advantages independent of size, unequal access to distribution channels, and restrictive government policy. As you'll see, many of these barriers are interrelated, which can increase the challenges for new entrants. Barriers to entry are also related to the lifecycle stage of an industry. When an industry or a market is new and emerging, barriers are generally low and many firms scramble to enter and build a dominant position. When an industry becomes more established and mature, it is often difficult for a new entrant to enter on a similar scale or level as an incumbent. Supply-side economies of scale. Supply-side economies of scale arise when a firm manufactures products or services in high volumes. The ability to produce and sell large volumes results in a much lower production cost. 23. These lower costs in turn can deter entry by new firms since they cannot generate the same production scale at the time of entry. 24. Scale-based forms of entry barriers are present in many industries, including microprocessors, steel, and automobiles. In each of these industries, there are fixed costs of entry, such as the cost of building a plant and purchasing equipment, which are extremely high. These large fixed costs, in turn, often warrant even larger scale production to generate profits, which can be a major obstacle for new entrants. Demand-side benefits of scale. These benefits for a product arise in situations where any buyer's willingness to pay for that product increases as the number of other buyers for that product increases. 25. In essence, buyers benefit by buying something that others are also buying. Some classic examples of this are the telephone and fax machines, where individual buyers benefited greatly when others also bought those products. The effect usually kicks in when there is a critical mass of people who have bought the product. These benefits of scale often discourage entry by reducing consumers' preference to purchase from a newcomer to the industry. The traditional example of demand-side benefits of scale is the Microsoft operating system, Windows, as Windows continues to dominate the operating system market with more than a 90% market share in 2014. Potential entrants are essentially locked out because of consumers' preference to buy systems that are compatible with the existing universe of software. Interestingly, Microsoft is confronting this very challenge as it tries to make inroads in the smartphone market with its Windows Phone operating system. Consumers are already loyal to operating systems using the Apple or Android platform. As of 2014, Windows phones only had 2.7% market share. Customer switching costs. Switching costs are fixed costs that buyers encounter if they change the supplier of a particular product or service. 29. A switching cost often arises because the buyer has to make changes to their product or operating procedure when using a new supply source. 30. A classic example was faced by computer companies like Apple, whose customers early on had to incur significant costs to switch over to them. Apple software was not compatible with other PC providers, and customers wanting to transfer their files from a PC product to an Apple product faced considerable challenges. The investment brokerage industry is another example, where customers face high switching costs. Many consumers conduct all of their investment activities through a single brokerage entity such as Fidelity Investments. The typical consumer may have stocks, mutual funds, and retirement accounts with the broker. Many consumers encounter roadblocks when attempting to transfer assets to another broker. In this case, the high costs that consumers face include the time and patience needed to complete the transfer. These high switching costs are also seen in online banking. Once a customer sets up his or her accounts, payment schedules, and billing information, the process of switching to another bank, regardless of potentially better interest rates, is not very appealing. Capital requirements. In many industries, large amounts of capital are required by any new entrant just to begin operating. Capital may be necessary not only for fixed facilities, but also for customer credit, inventories, and possibly startup losses. Many industries require new entrants to make huge capital expenditures for entry, including copper mining, pharmaceuticals, and steel production. The research and development costs in the pharmaceutical industry are tremendous, with average drug development costs exceeding $2 billion prior to approval. 32 With this requirement, many potential entrants are restricted from entering the industry. Incumbency advantages independent of size. In many industries, incumbent companies maintain cost or quality advantages that are not easily available to a potential rival. 33 These advantages may include superior technology, preferential access to raw materials, government subsidies, or even a strong brand. 34 As we saw in the case of IBM, proprietary technology can act as a significant barrier to entry. When IBM outsourced several components of its PC to other firms, it effectively destroyed an important barrier to entry. Unequal access to distribution channels. Every company must distribute its product or service to customers through what are known as distribution channels. These include wholesalers and even local retailers where the ultimate customer purchases the product or service. However, many industries, for example, beverages, are marked by limited distribution channels. If you've ever walked into a convenience store, you've probably noticed the proliferation of soft drinks, bottled waters, and juices. Many of these products are not only manufactured, but also distributed by firms such as Coke and Pepsi through some wholly owned bottlers or others who have an exclusive agreement with them. For new entrants such as vitamin water, the barriers to entry were significant because they needed to find distribution channels for their product. Ultimately, they needed someone to deliver their product to the retailer. At the same time, they needed to convince retailers to offer them valuable shelf space for their new and untested product. To combat this problem, Vitamin Water courted independent distributors through extensive promotion and marketing. Vitamin Water's founder, Darius Dickoff, aggressively marketed his product to distributors and retailers, often going door to door in Manhattan to gain shelf space in stores. Through this effort, Vitamin Water slowly gained a toehold in what is traditionally a difficult market to enter. 35 Restrictive government policy. Governments can limit or even foreclose entry to industries via controls such as license requirements, patent protection, foreign investment barriers, and limits on access to local raw materials markets. 36 The New York City cab industry represents an industry marked by restrictive government policy. In New York, the number of cabs is capped at approximately 14,000 licenses. These licenses, known as medallions in New York City, are valuable commodities controlled by a few private firms. Since the number of taxi medallions is fixed, those sold on the open market can fetch up to $1 million. 7 This system has historically prevented an aspiring entrepreneur from buying a car and running his or her own taxi service. The emergence of ride service companies such as Uber and Lyft has diminished the traditional power of these restrictions in the taxi industry. It is not surprising then that taxi companies in major metropolitan cities have worked vigorously to restrict the entrant of these new companies. Force 2 The bargaining power of suppliers. The second of 5 forces that shapes industry profitability is the relative bargaining power of suppliers to that industry. If the suppliers are strong compared to the buyers in that industry, they can dictate their terms, and in turn, reduce the profitability of that industry. Suppliers provide firms in an industry with essential inputs in the manufacturing or production process. For most firms, the term supplier connotes a broad group, including entities such as the utility company, raw material producers, for example, steel producers, employees supplying labor inputs, manufacturers of preassembled components, and services ranging from security to consulting. Every industry and the firms within it have a long list of suppliers that exert different degrees of power over them. Some of the most common aspects of supplier power occur when there are no substitutes for the supplier's product, when the supplier limits production, or when the supplier does not consider the industry as one of its major customers. 38 There are several other forms of supplier power that we'll explore in a moment. For now, let's look at an example that demonstrates supplier power in action. For the last 2 decades, Microsoft has exerted tremendous supplier power over PC makers. As the dominant producer of operating system software, Microsoft has maintained a market share in the 90% range for the last 2 decades. The company has maintained this share because of the barriers to entry in the operating system software industry. As mentioned previously, Microsoft enjoys demand-side benefits of scale. When IBM outsourced the production of its operating system to Microsoft in 1981, it provided the firm with a first-mover advantage that has proved difficult to overcome. First-mover advantage occurs when a firm is the first to offer desirable products or services that secure customer loyalty. One study has shown that first movers can sometimes enjoy a decade-long advantage over second movers in an industry. 39 As the standard for IBM and PC clones, Microsoft Windows became an essential component of every PC. As the years passed and the number of Windows users increased, Microsoft's supplier power grew stronger, making it difficult for competitors to enter the industry. While the company sells Windows directly to consumers, the majority of its sales go through original equipment manufacturers (OEMs) that build the PCs. With a network of Windows in the hundreds of millions, most OEMs have little choice but to include the Windows system in its offerings and pay whatever price Microsoft dictates. As you can see, every industry has a long list of suppliers that manifest different sources of power relative to the firms in that industry. While Microsoft exhibits extreme supplier power over OEMs in the PC industry, other suppliers that sell to OEMs in that same industry may exhibit low bargaining power, for instance disk drive manufacturers. The important thing to remember is that every industry and market is different in terms of who has the power in the buyer-supplier relationship. Characteristics of a powerful supplier group. Among an industry's list of suppliers, several characteristics determine whether a group is powerful relative to the firms in that industry. A supplier industry will tend to be powerful when the following happens. The supplier industry is more concentrated than the industry it sells to. We saw this form of supplier power in the Microsoft example, where a single firm clearly dominates the operating system industry, while a dozen firms compete in the PC industry. Industry participants in the buyer industry face switching costs in changing suppliers. Many utilities are forced to purchase certain varieties of coal because their boilers are commissioned to accept coal with specific chemical properties. To switch to another variety of coal, utilities must decommission the plant for a time to retrofit it with equipment to handle the new coal. In this case, utilities face extreme switching costs in terms of coal use. No substitutes exist for what the supplier group provides. In the pharmaceutical industry, individual drug and medical device makers produce extremely differentiated products that are protected by patents, making it impossible for anyone to copy their product for the duration of the patent. Through the duration of patent protection, consumers and hospitals that need the product have low bargaining power relative to the drug maker. In many cases, the drugs or devices are unique, and no one has produced anything close to it, which concentrates power with the supplier. As we will see later in this chapter, individuals suffering from certain diseases have no alternative treatments. A company such as Genzyme and other pharmaceutical companies that make unique offerings by developing treatment for rare diseases can price their products with almost total discretion. The supplier group can threaten to integrate forward into the buyer industry. This tends to happen when an industry earns significant profits, the barriers to entry in the industry are low, and the supplier to that industry has the resources and capabilities to move downstream into it. Diesel, a luxury clothing producer, forward integrated into the retail industry when it opened its own monobrand stores to sell its jeans. The supplier group does not depend heavily on the industry. If the supplier group does not count the industry as a major customer, it may seek to extract maximum profits from the industry through aggressive pricing by virtue of the fact that the industry is not a major customer of the supplier industry. The supplier has greater power. It can threaten to walk away at very little cost to itself if the buyer industry doesn't accept its terms. If it's a critical input for the buyers, they may have no choice. Force 3. The threat of substitutes. The possible threat of substitutes, or the appearance of real substitutes, can also limit the profitability of an industry. Take the example of the local taxi industry in many markets around the world where it was quite profitable with few threats of substitutes and high entry barriers due to government restrictions and licensing requirements. Companies like Uber that provide links between passengers and drivers have upended the traditional taxi service in many major cities around the world. Uber has been able to circumvent the traditional restrictions on taxi regulation regulations and licenses in the cities in which it operates by claiming that it is a technology platform for matching people with specific transportation needs. It asserts that it is not an actual transportation company and therefore should not be subject to the typical regulations that apply to taxis and limos, thereby bypassing